A student violating the dress code at an exclusive private school should have been a minor issue. Instead, it set off a series of events that would stun the entire nation. At just 14 years old, Sofia Martinez sat facing a judge, an outcome no one could have foreseen. Never in her wildest dreams did Sofia imagine finding herself in a courtroom at her age, especially over something as seemingly insignificant as her attire. Amid the surreal nature of the situation, Judge Barrett's voice broke the silence in the courtroom. "Miss Martinez," she began, her tone calm yet compassionate, "do you think the school's response was reasonable?" Sofia's fingers traced the edge of the wooden witness stand, her eyes drifting to her mother, Victoria, in the front row. Victoria Martinez sat straight-backed in her carefully pressed thrift store blazer, the same one she wore to all three of her jobs. The same mother who taught her that dignity wasn't found in designer labels but in the content of one's character. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife as Sofia leaned toward the microphone. 3 months ago, she'd received a simple notification that would change everything. Dress code violation, failure to maintain appropriate academic attire standards, and this was the perceived crime she was being called to answer for today. "No, Your Honor," Sofia replied, her voice quivering at first but gaining strength with every word. "I firmly believe their actions were completely unjustified." She could still feel the burning shame of that day, standing in the principal's office as Mrs. Davidson looked down her nose at Sofia's carefully clean but obviously budget-conscious clothes. "Perhaps," the principal had said, adjusting her Gucci glasses, "Silverbrook Academy isn't the right fit for someone of your background." The memory made Sofia's spine straighten. She'd earned her place at Silverbrook through academic excellence and a partial scholarship. Yet here she was, suspended, not for any behavioral issue or academic shortcoming, but because her clothes, while meeting all modesty requirements, didn't come with the right labels. "Would you tell us what happened, Miss Martinez?" Judge Barrett prompted. "From the beginning." Sofia took a deep breath, her mother's encouraging nod giving her strength. This wasn't just about a dress code anymore. This was about dignity, about right and wrong, about standing up for every student who'd ever felt less than because of what they wore. "It began 3 months ago, Your Honor," Sofia explained, her tone steady. "But the reality is, the tension had been growing for far longer than that." September had begun with such promise. Sofia had earned her place at Silverbrook Academy through a competitive academic scholarship program, one of only 3 students in her year to receive the honor. Her entrance essays had impressed the board, and her perfect scores on the placement exams had opened doors that seemed impossible for a girl from the east side of town. On the first day of school, she had worn her new clothes with pride. She and her mother had spent the entire summer planning, saving, and shopping carefully. They'd studied the dress code handbook like it was sacred text. Navy blue, white, or gray tops, knee-length skirts or pressed slacks, closed-toe shoes. Everything had to be solid colors, with no visible brands or logos. Victoria Martinez had worked extra shifts at the hospital cafeteria, picked up weekend cleaning jobs, and even sold her grandmother's silver earrings to ensure Sofia had enough outfits to start the school year. They'd hunted through clearance racks, sale days, and discount stores, meticulously assembling a wardrobe that met every written requirement. The murmurs began during second period. Taylor Chen, whose father owned a significant share of the city's tech startups, glanced at Sofia's cardigan and asked, loud enough for the entire class to hear, "Is that from Target?" When Sofia admitted that it was, Taylor laughed. Not in a cruel way exactly, but as if Sofia had shared a joke she found entertaining. A pattern of subtle exclusion began to emerge. She was left off group text chains for study sessions because, as one student explained, "We didn't think you'd want to meet at the country club." Her raised hand in AP European history was increasingly overlooked despite her perfect test scores. Partners in the lab would mysteriously have already paired up before she entered the room. By October 3rd, the official interventions began. Mrs. Davidson, their principal, issued the first courtesy notice about maintaining Silverbrook's standards of excellence. The carefully worded messages suggested that, while technically within dress code parameters, some students' attire might not fully reflect the prestigious nature of their institution. Another notice mentioned concerns about the quality and origin of certain students' wardrobes potentially impacting their community's image. The real breaking point came after the Alumni Weekend fashion show. Every year, Silverbrook Academy hosted a charity fashion show during Alumni Weekend, featuring current students modeling academic excellence in action. Sophia, with her perfect GPA and position on the debate team, should have been a natural choice. Instead, she was told her presentation wouldn't adequately represent the Silverbrook standard. The next day, Sophia wore a new navy blue dress, one her mother had found on clearance at Marshall's. It matched the dress code perfectly. Knee length, proper neckline, approved color. But during morning assembly, Mrs. Davidson pulled her aside. Victoria received a call at work. They said Sophia was being suspended for repeated dress code violations and failing to maintain appropriate academic attire standards. She left her shift early, losing half a day's pay, and drove straight to the school. The office staff made her wait 45 minutes in the outer office while Mrs. Davidson finished what appeared to be a leisurely lunch meeting with 2 board members. When Mrs. Davidson finally agreed to see Victoria, she barely looked up from her computer, wearing what was clearly an expensive designer blazer, more than Victoria made in a month. She adjusted her glasses and said, "Perhaps, Mrs. Martinez, Silverbrook Academy isn't the right fit for your daughter." The message couldn't have been clearer. It wasn't about the clothes themselves. It was about their origin, and, by extension, Sophia's. Despite having the highest GPA in her class, never being late, and never breaking a rule, the only thing wrong with her clothes was that they came from the wrong stores. The unwritten dress code had become more important than any academic achievement. The drive home from Silverbrook Academy that afternoon was silent. Victoria's cafeteria uniform felt heavy on her shoulders, the smell of industrial cleaner still clinging to her sleeves as her hands gripped the steering wheel of their aging Honda Civic. In the passenger seat, Sophia sat perfectly straight, her suspended status hanging between them like an invisible wall. At a red light, Victoria caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. 11 years had passed since she'd last seen Miguel Martinez in the marble-floored lobby of his family's law firm. She could still hear his father's voice, cold and calculated. "Name your price. The situation can be handled discreetly." The check they'd offered to never show up in their lives again, with Miguel's child in tow, would have set her up comfortably for years. Instead, she'd walked out, her head held high, choosing dignity over dollars. The light turned green, and Victoria accelerated past the familiar landmarks of their East Side neighborhood. The discount grocery store where she bought markdown produce, the thrift shop where she'd found Sophia's first interview outfit for Silverbrook, the library where her daughter had spent countless hours studying for the scholarship exam. "Mom?" Sophia's voice was quiet, a stark contrast to the confidence she had built since starting at Silverbrook. "I'm sorry about the dress. Maybe if we had saved more, or if I had—" "No." Victoria cut her off, her tone sharper than she intended, startling them both. As she pulled into the parking lot of their apartment complex, she turned to look at her daughter. "You have nothing to apologize for, mi amor. Nothing." Inside their small but meticulously kept apartment, Victoria's phone buzzed. The name on the screen made her stomach clench. Miguel Martinez. News traveled fast in certain circles, and apparently their confrontation with Principal Davidson had already reached his ears. Victoria! His voice was calm, polished, the tone of a man accustomed to resolving issues with his checkbook. I heard about the situation at Silverbrook. I can fix this. One call to the board chairman. Like you tried to make us go away? The words left her mouth before she could stop them. There was a brief silence. That's not fair. I was young. My family. And now our daughter is being judged for wearing clothes from Target instead of Nordstrom. Victoria interrupted sharply. Tell me, Miguel, what's fair about that? This time, the pause stretched longer. Let me help, Victoria. Not with money, but with connections, Miguel finally offered. The board members at Silverbrook are my associates. A single word from me could prove exactly what's broken about this system. Victoria cut him off, her voice calm but resolute, years of pent-up frustration sharpening into conviction. Yes, your influence could help Sophia. But what about the next child? What about the next parent working 3 jobs just to give their kid a chance at a better future? After hanging up, Victoria sat at their small kitchen table where Sophia's perfect report cards were proudly displayed on the refrigerator. Next to them was a newspaper clipping about her scholarship win and a photo from her first day at Silverbrook. Sophia beaming in her carefully chosen uniform, Victoria standing proud beside her. The sound of keys in the door made them both look up. Elena, Victoria's closest friend and fellow hospital worker, burst in without knocking, still in her nurse's scrubs. I just heard from Maria in HR, Elena said, dropping into a chair, her niece at St. Mary's. Same thing happened there last year. Private school, scholarship student. Suddenly her perfectly acceptable clothes weren't appropriate anymore. The family couldn't fight it, couldn't afford to. The girl's back in public school now. That evening, something in Victoria snapped. Maybe it was the weight of all those extra shifts, or the memory of Sophia's face in the principal's office, or simply years of swallowing her pride while people like Mrs. Davidson looked down their noses at her daughter. Whatever it was, Victoria found herself reaching for her phone. "Mihija," she called to Sophia. "Come here." They sat together at their small kitchen table, the same one where Sophia had poured countless hours into studying her way into Silverbrook's scholarship program. Victoria set her phone upright, took a steadying breath, and pressed record. Sorry for the interruption. Before we continue with the story, I kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It is very important for us. Thank you very much. My name is Victoria Martinez, she began, still wearing her cafeteria uniform, her fatigue evident, but her voice unwavering. Today, my daughter was suspended from Silverbrook Academy, not for cheating, not for fighting, but because her clothing, though it met every dress code standard, came from Target instead of Nordstrom. Sophia joined her mother on camera, holding up the marshal's dress that had earned her suspension next to a printout of the school's dress code. Same length, same color, same style, she demonstrated. The only difference is the price tag. They talked about the subtle discrimination, the exclusion, the way maintaining standards had become code for maintaining economic barriers. Victoria spoke about working 3 jobs to give her daughter a chance at a better education, only to watch that chance being stripped away because of designer labels. Elena, Victoria's colleague from the hospital cafeteria, was the first to share the video. Take a look at this, she captioned it. This is what's going on at Silverbrook Academy right now. The other cafeteria workers shared it next, then the nurses, then the custodial staff. By midnight, it had reached the hospital administration's group chat, parents, many of whom sent their children to private schools themselves. By morning, the video had exploded. Local parent groups shared it, then educational advocacy pages, then national news outlets. Comments poured in from across the country, other families sharing similar stories of discrimination hidden behind dress codes and standards of excellence. Victoria's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages flooded in from former Silverbrook students who'd faced similar treatment, from parents at other private schools, from civil rights organizations offering support. A comment from a woman named Catherine Wong caught Victoria's eye. "They did the same to my daughter last spring. We felt so alone. Not anymore." The Johnsons reached out next. Their son had been encouraged to seek education elsewhere after his father's business went bankrupt. Then came messages from St. Mary's, Westbrook Prep, and Hamilton Academy. A pattern of systematic discrimination, hiding behind perfectly pressed uniforms and carefully worded policies, began to emerge. What truly caught Victoria's attention was a message from Dr. Maria Gutierrez, a well-known civil rights attorney renowned for tackling cases of educational discrimination. "Your daughter's video has brought to light what we've been fighting to prove for years," the message read. "Let's work together to ensure this never happens to another student." The next morning, Victoria walked into her supervisor's office at the hospital cafeteria. She knew she couldn't afford to take even a single hour off, but she also knew her daughter came first. Before she could speak, her supervisor turned her computer monitor around. Sophia's video was playing. The view count was now in the millions. "Take whatever time you need," her supervisor said, a fierce pride in her voice. "We've got your back." A couple of weeks after the video went viral, Victoria and Sophia sat in the federal courthouse, watching their story unfold in a way they never imagined. Dr. Gutierrez had built a formidable case, combining their viral testimony with evidence from dozens of other families who'd come forward after seeing Sophia's video. The courtroom was packed. Hospital workers in scrubs sat next to parents in business suits, a visual reminder that discrimination didn't clock out at the end of a shift. Social media had transformed their private humiliation into a national conversation about educational equity, with research dignity over designer trending across platforms. Principal Davidson had been replaced, pending investigation. But the school board's attorneys sat confidently at their table, armed with precedents about private institutions' rights to set their own standards. They tried to paint Victoria and Sophia as attention seekers, riding a wave of viral fame for financial gain. Then Dr. Gutierrez began presenting evidence. Surveillance footage showed administrators pulling aside only scholarship students for uniform checks. Emails revealed discussions about encouraging more suitable candidates to apply. A pattern of exclusion from college recruitment events became apparent. The turning point came when Sophia took the stand. Gone was the hesitant girl from the viral video. In her place sat a young woman who'd found her voice in the midst of injustice. Her voice grew stronger as she described the pattern of discrimination, the exclusion from school events, the subtle suggestions to transfer, the whispered comments about maintaining standards. The viral video played on the courtroom screen, its raw honesty even more powerful in this formal setting. "When my mom shared that video, we thought maybe a few people would get it," Sophia explained. "Instead, we heard from hundreds of families who had experienced the same kind of discrimination. Students who weren't excluded for failing academically, but for failing to meet economic expectations." The school board's attorney tried to interrupt, but Judge Barrett waved him silent, her eyes fixed on Sophia. "Your Honor," Sophia concluded, her voice clear and unwavering, "my mother taught me that dignity isn't found in a price tag or how expensive your clothes look. She showed me that standing up for what's right matters more than fitting in. I'm here today not just for myself, but for every student who's ever felt less than because of what they wear." Victoria watched her daughter from the gallery, tears streaming down her face. She thought about that day in the principal's office, about all the double shifts and missed holidays, about Miguel Martinez's attempt to solve the problem with his influence. But most of all, she thought about dignity, the kind that couldn't be bought or sold, the kind that her daughter now embodied on the witness stand. The social media hashtag that had brought them here, Dignity Over Designer, was now displayed on signs outside the courthouse. Students from schools across the city had gathered in support. Inside the courtroom, it wasn't about viral fame or trending topics. It was about a mother and daughter who refused to let their dignity be measured by a price tag, and in doing so had exposed a system of discrimination that could no longer hide behind carefully worded policies and pressed uniforms. Judge Barrett's ruling struck like a thunderbolt on a clear day. In a society that professes to value education as the great equalizer, she proclaimed, her voice resonating through the silent courtroom, we cannot permit economic discrimination to disguise itself as a pursuit of excellence. The verdict was comprehensive. Not only was Sophia's suspension overturned with full reinstatement, but Silverbrook Academy and similar private schools receiving state funding were ordered to implement transparent, economically neutral dress codes. The school board was required to establish an oversight committee, including parents from diverse economic backgrounds. But it was what happened after the gavel fell that truly changed their lives. Judge Barrett approached Victoria in the courthouse corridor. "Mrs. Martinez," she said, "I've watched you throughout this trial. Your dignity, your determination to fight for what's right rather than what's easy, it's exactly what I've been looking for." Victoria learned that Judge Barrett, before her appointment to the bench, had built a successful restaurant chain focused on ethical business practices, now expanding nationwide. She needed someone to head their corporate social responsibility program, someone who understood both the service industry and the importance of creating genuine opportunities for advancement. "The position is in Denver," Judge Barrett explained. "Double your current salary, full benefits, and most importantly, the chance to create real change in how companies approach economic equity." Victoria looked at Sophia, seeing the same mix of excitement and uncertainty in her daughter's eyes. They'd fought so hard to stay in their community. But perhaps the real victory wasn't in staying. It was in using their experience to help others. 2 months later, Victoria sat in her new office overlooking the Rocky Mountains, reviewing applications for the Dignity First scholarship program she'd created. The initiative, inspired by their story, didn't just provide tuition assistance, it covered all school-related expenses, ensuring students could fully participate in their educational experience without financial barriers. Sophia thrived at her new school, where her experience had made her a natural leader. She founded the Student Equity Alliance, bringing together students from diverse economic backgrounds to address systemic barriers in education. Did you enjoy this story? Have you ever experienced or witnessed discrimination on economic grounds? How did you respond to it? Let us know in the comments below. If you like the story, subscribe to this channel and leave a like. Sometimes, the most important changes start with a single act of courage. Thanks so much for listening. See you in the next video. Have a great day.